You're not stuck because you lack discipline. You're losing ground because you can't tolerate not knowing. It shows up in ways that look harmless: checking your phone again, making a decision early, closing something that isn't ready. But those moments don't just pass. They compound. Over time, they flatten your income curve, narrow your options, and lock you into paths that feel stable but don't scale. The mechanism is simple. Your brain treats uncertainty like a problem to solve, not because it improves outcomes, but because it removes the gap. And the faster you close that gap, the faster you trade long-term upside for short-term relief. So decisions stop being guided by what leads somewhere better and start being guided by what ends the tension now. This isn't about anxiety. It's about a feedback loop that rewards premature certainty. And if you don't see it, 5 years can pass with no real change, just cleaner, safer, smaller decisions. I'll break down 3 signs you're optimizing for closure instead of outcome, and 1 adjustment that restores long-term leverage. There's a moment most people recognize, but rarely stop to examine. You send a message, or submit an application, or check your bank account after a purchase you probably shouldn't have made. And then, nothing. No response, no confirmation, no immediate outcome. Just a quiet stretch of time where nothing is clearly wrong, but nothing is resolved either. So you check your phone again, refresh the page, reopen the app. Not because anything has changed, but because staying in that moment feels off. It's subtle, not panic, not fear in the usual sense, just a low-level tension that sits in the background, waiting. You might tell yourself you're being productive, staying on top of things, being responsible, but if you look closely, the behavior doesn't actually improve the situation. The message won't arrive faster. The number won't change because you looked twice. And still, you check again. Because doing something, even something ineffective, feels better than doing nothing. That's the part most people don't question. Why does inaction feel uncomfortable, even when action has no real effect? Why does the absence of information feel like a problem that needs to be solved immediately? At first, it seems harmless, a habit, a reflex, something small. But over time, this same feeling starts showing up in larger decisions. And when it does, the cost isn't just a few extra checks. It's the choices you make just to make the feeling stop. At first, it seems like the discomfort is about what might happen. The message could be bad, the result could be negative, the number could be lower than expected. So it feels natural to assume the tension comes from those possible outcomes. But if that were true, the feeling would peak when the result arrives. Instead, something else happens. The moment you finally get the answer, even if it's not what you wanted, the tension drops, not because the outcome is good, but because it's no longer unknown. The discomfort wasn't coming from the event. It was coming from the space before it. That gap. The stretch of time where your brain has nothing solid to hold on to, no clear direction, no closure. In that gap, the mind doesn't stay neutral. It starts generating possibilities, filling in blanks, running quiet simulations of what could go wrong, not in a dramatic way, just enough to keep the system alert. And the longer that gap stays open, the more energy it takes to sit inside it. So the brain looks for a way out. Not necessarily the right answer, just an answer, something that collapses the uncertainty into something defined, even if that definition is incomplete, even if it's wrong. Because from the brain's perspective, an incorrect certainty often feels more manageable than an unresolved unknown. And that shift, subtle at first, starts changing how decisions get made, not based on what leads to better outcomes, but based on what closes the gap faster. There's a point where this pattern becomes easier to notice. You're waiting for an answer that matters, a job response, a financial result, a decision that could go either way. At first, you hope for a positive outcome, but as time passes, something shifts. The question slowly stops being, "Will this go well?" and starts becoming, Can this just be over? That change is subtle, but it alters everything. Because now the priority is no longer the quality of the outcome, it's the removal of the uncertainty. And that's where the contradiction appears. A clear rejection can feel strangely relieving. A loss can feel cleaner than an open possibility. Even a bad number can feel better than not knowing the number at all. Not because the result is good, but because it closes the loop. It gives the brain something solid, something finished, something it no longer has to simulate. You see this in small moments. Refreshing an investment app during volatility, almost hoping for the drop just to confirm what's happening. Opening a message you suspect is negative, just to stop thinking about it. Making a quick decision, not because it's right, but because delaying it feels worse. Each time the same trade is happening, a potentially better future is exchanged for immediate clarity. And most of the time, it doesn't even feel like a trade. It just feels like relief, but that relief has a direction, because once the brain learns that certainty, even negative certainty, ends the discomfort, it starts seeking closure faster the next time, and the decisions begin to change with it. Once you start noticing it, the pattern shows up in places that don't seem connected, not just in big moments, but in small, almost invisible decisions. You hesitate before making a purchase, not because you can't afford it, but because something feels uncertain. So you buy it anyway, and the moment the transaction goes through, the tension disappears. Not because the decision was correct, but because it's finished, or you're in a situation that isn't clearly good or clearly bad. A job that's fine, a relationship that's unclear, nothing urgent, nothing broken, but also nothing resolved. So you start leaning toward a decision, not from clarity but from discomfort. Ending it, changing it, locking something in. Again, not necessarily because it improves anything, but because it removes the open loop. Even in financial choices, the pattern repeats. Selling too early. Avoiding opportunities that take time to play out. Choosing predictable outcomes over uncertain ones, even when the uncertain path has better long-term potential. From the outside, these decisions can look cautious or impulsive or even disciplined, but underneath, they share the same structure. They close something that feels unfinished. They replace an open possibility with a defined result. And in the moment, that feels like control. But over time, something quieter starts to happen. The decisions begin to follow the discomfort, not the outcome. At this point, the pattern is no longer occasional. It becomes directional. Decisions start organizing themselves around one priority: reduce uncertainty as quickly as possible, not eliminate risk, not improve outcomes, just shorten the time spent not knowing. And that shift is easy to miss, because nothing dramatic happens all at once. Instead, the effects show up slowly. You move toward options that give faster feedback, even if the upside is smaller. You avoid paths where results take longer to appear, even when those paths historically lead somewhere better. You begin to favor clarity over potential, a stable income over a scalable one, a known environment over an ambiguous opportunity, a quick answer over a better answer. Individually, each decision feels reasonable, even responsible, but together they create a pattern, one where your trajectory becomes more predictable and at the same time more limited. There's less volatility, fewer unknowns, but also fewer meaningful shifts, and the cost doesn't appear immediately. It shows up as something that doesn't move. Income that plateaus earlier than expected. Opportunities that almost happened but didn't. Decisions that felt right in the moment but didn't compound over time. Nothing feels like a mistake. That's what makes it hard to see. Because each choice solved the immediate discomfort, it just quietly redirected the long-term path. And by the time the pattern becomes visible, it doesn't look like a series of decisions anymore. It looks like stability, but not the kind that grows. By now, the pattern is clear, but the reason behind it hasn't been fully visible, because this isn't just a habit, it isn't just personality, and it isn't random, it's structural. The human brain was not designed for modern timelines. It was shaped in environments where uncertainty often meant immediate risk. Not knowing where something was could mean danger. Not knowing what a sound was could mean a threat. Not knowing what would happen next could mean you wouldn't have time to react. In that context, uncertainty wasn't neutral. It carried weight. So the brain adapted. It became efficient at closing gaps quickly, at turning incomplete information into usable conclusions, at favoring fast clarity over prolonged ambiguity, not because it was always correct, but because it increased the chances of survival. And that system still exists, unchanged in its core function. The difference is the environment. Today, most uncertainty doesn't involve immediate danger. Markets that take time to move, careers that evolve over years, decisions that only reveal their outcomes much later. But the brain doesn't fully distinguish between those timelines. It still reacts to uncertainty as if it needs to be resolved quickly. So when you feel the urge to check again, to decide early, to close something before it's ready, it's not just preference. It's an old system doing exactly what it was built to do. The problem is no longer survival. It's mismatch, because the same mechanism that once protected you from immediate risk now quietly interferes with anything that requires time, patience, or incomplete information. And most modern outcomes depend on exactly those conditions. At the beginning, it just felt like a small discomfort, a message without a reply, a number not yet updated, a decision left open a little longer than expected. Nothing serious, just something you wanted to resolve. And over time, that instinct started to guide choices, not in obvious ways, not through dramatic mistakes, but through quiet preferences, choosing the option that gives an answer now instead of the one that might lead somewhere better later, ending things before they fully develop because the ambiguity feels heavier than the outcome. Locking in results early, just to replace an open question with something defined. Each time, it feels like progress. Something is decided, something is finished, something is no longer uncertain. But that sense of resolution has a cost, because the moments you cut short are often the ones that carry the most potential. The opportunities that take time to become visible. The outcomes that require staying in the unknown longer than feels comfortable. And the more consistently those moments are closed too early, the more life starts to reflect that pattern, not through failure, but through a kind of quiet narrowing. Fewer surprises, fewer shifts, fewer outcomes that exceed expectations. Everything becomes more predictable, and that's exactly what the brain was trying to achieve. But in a world where most meaningful results take time to unfold, the real trade isn't between certainty and risk. It's between immediate relief and everything that only exists on the other side of not knowing.